Well, good evening, everybody. It's absolutely wonderful to imagine seeing you. We have so enjoyed sharing on these Zoom leadership course nights. But lockdown plans meant that we're away on holiday without internet connection tonight. So we're greeting you from there. Let me read as we start from John chapter 15 and verse 7 onwards, where Jesus says, "If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you will, and it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you'll abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lays down his life for his friends. And you are my friends, if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant doesn't know what their master is doing, but I've called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I've made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you, that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask in my name, he may give to you. And these things I command you, so that you will love one another." Well, I'm really looking forward to what Anita has to say on this last session. So let's pray before she comes. Father, thank you that you have called us remarkably to be friends of God and friends with one another. And we want to ask you that on this night, you would release friendship and all your wisdom for it, and your patience to build that, and that we would discover this pearl of great price. And we ask it in Jesus' name as you bless everyone attending. Amen.
Well, hello everybody from me as well. Like Charlie, I really wish we could be with you, and it does feel quite funny to be doing this on a very sunny afternoon here in Oxford before we go away. And we're sorry that things worked out this way. But it's still a joy to be able to talk to you and share our hearts and our lives with you, really. So I want to talk about friendship this evening. And Charlie's read that passage to you from John chapter 15. I want now to read, as I start, a quote by Eugene Peterson, which is precious to me. "Friendship is a much underestimated aspect of spirituality. It's every bit as significant as prayer and fasting. Like the sacramental use of water and bread and wine, friendship takes what's common in human experience and turns it into something holy." Friendship takes what's common in human experience and turns it into something holy, and is every bit as significant as prayer and fasting, and it has something sacramental about it. It's something that's very important to me, always has been, and my friends are very important to me, and I've thought so much about friendship and invested lots in the friends that I have, and lots of you are among those friends. There are different levels of friendship, but I want to start by asking us, what is friendship and what's a friend? In the dictionary, a friend is defined as a person well known to another and regarded with liking, affection, and loyalty, and intimate. You might be surprised to hear that word, and to hear that the root meaning of the word intimacy has to do with friendship, not with sexuality, as I guess is very commonly understood in our culture, because the Latin intimus means very close friend. And I want to think about this kind of intimate friendship this evening, not really Facebook friends, not acquaintances, and not even church friends, although I'll come back to that a little bit later. Friends who happen to go to the same or another church, yes, but that's a different thing from church friends. Thomas Aquinas made friendship with God the basis for all our understanding of love, both for God and neighbour. In the Four Loves, C.S. Lewis describes the love of friendship, philia. And philia, the friendship love, has a long history of association with love for God, caritas, charity, agape, sacrificial love. Plato and Aristotle, all the philosophers and all the church fathers and all the mystics had things to say about friendship. So that's where we start. And a good question to ask ourselves this evening as we're thinking about being leaders is, am I a friend of God? He may well be my Lord and my Saviour, and I may be his disciple, but am I his friend? I think that in general, friendship is binary. That's to say, between two people in terms of any depth being found, whether that's on Facebook or face-to-face. We could easily be at a party with 100 friends, but the only way that any of those friendships present at the party are going to deepen or grow is going to be in a conversation face-to-face. We may be at another event or a wedding where we have friendships with lots of people, but again, the only way any of the friendships will grow among people who are there is through face-to-face exchanges. We all used to be together every Sunday, probably several hundred people, some of us often twice in the day. But probably we only had 3 or 4 friendship deepening exchanges when we were together in those large groups. It's possible that some of us have developed deeper friendships in lockdown, as we've spent a lot more time on Zoom calls and our phones and computers have become literal lifelines of communication. I think in a way that is true for me. Real friendships are cross-generational, cross-racial, and cross-background. I've got friends in their late 80s, somebody who used to be a spiritual director for me and is a very dear friend. I've got friends in their 20s and 30s. To me, the person who's a friend is a person who knows me well enough and who I know well enough that if I was to be upset or crying or sad, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't be embarrassed or feel I couldn't do that with them. Henry Nouwen said, when we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives means the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving advice or solutions or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a warm and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief or bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That is a friend who cares. I've never forgotten a friend back in the days when Charlie was training the wives of one of the other ordinands, who talked about a time when she had a stillbirth, and a friend of hers, this was before we knew her, a friend of hers had gone simply and sat with her in the hospital, just weeping, no words, just being with her. And her testimony was that was incredibly helpful and soothing. So we've looked just for a moment or two at what is a friend, and I want to think now about what is friendship with God and what does the Bible tell us about that. Well, in the Old Testament, Adam and Eve, there's a real sense of the friendship with God before the fall. When we read in Genesis 3:8, God was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. It conveys a real sense of intimate friendship. Obviously, he then couldn't find them and everything unraveled, but the friendship was there at the beginning. And then Abraham in Genesis chapter 18 has a discussion with God about Sodom and Gomorrah. Again, sadly, it's about things going wrong, but the text speaks of friendship because in verse 7, God says, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do?" And we see within that trust and confidence and revelation. And Abraham is referred to as a friend of God right across the Bible in 2 Chronicles 20, verse 7, in Isaiah 41, verse 8, and all the way through to the New Testament in James chapter 2, verse 23. And then thirdly, in the Old Testament, Moses is portrayed as a friend of God. We read in Exodus 33:11, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks with his friend. And in our reading in John 15, Jesus instructs the disciples to remain in his love and keep his commandments, telling them at the same time that this is going to bring them overflowing and amazing joy. He promotes them, as it were, from servants to friends, saying, I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. That's verse 15. And it's as if they suddenly move into the inside loop. They're in the know. And this is what real friendship is. And the passage tells us that as well as the privilege of belonging, which we all crave, true friendship brings sacrifice and suffering with it too. Because verse 13 says, greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. Something, of course, that Jesus was about to do. He's told them everything he learned from his Father, says verse 15. But at this point, they haven't really understood it all. Verse 12, he says, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. But they haven't understood at this point that this is a call to great sacrifice. As well as these examples in the Bible, and the example of Jesus himself, the Bible offers us deep friendship models that we can draw from. For example, David's friendship with Jonathan, Naomi's friendship with Ruth, or Paul's friendship with lots of people, actually, Timothy, Priscilla, Aquila, Silas, Epaphras, Onesimus, lots of them. And we can look at all these friendships and think about the way that they address each other. Next, I want to look at friendship with each other. This is the third point. In his book, Leap Over a Wall, Reflections on the Life of David, Eugene Peterson says, many a covenantal friendship is lived out similarly to that of Jonathan and David in Saul's court. What he means by this is sometimes a friendship is stronger than a person's other relations in their life because, you know, there can be really sad marital relations, there can be broken family relations, there can be difficult work relations, and there can be cultural conditions, this is what Peterson says, that are hostile to avowed intimacy. And so a friend is a necessary person to whom we can vent, unload, who can give us support and consolation. And of course, Jonathan and David were living in a very hostile environment in Saul's court, as it were. And many of us may experience long stretches in our lives without a romantic partner or a spouse for all sorts of reasons. As I've said, family relations are not always close, either geographically or emotionally. Our workplace may be stressful. A lot of jobs impact our social life in all sorts of different ways, especially people who work in shifts, long hours, you know, difficult deadlines and so on. So whatever our personal circumstances, they're bound to bring challenges, and friends are vital for our flourishing. And a friend is somebody who's there for you when you haven't got much to give. It's not just equal giving all the time. A lot of relationships today are transactional. In other words, they offer economic or social or emotional benefits, but that is not really the definition of a friendship. They're more like consumer-based exchanges. What can I get for what I give? Proverbs 19:7 says, a poor man is shunned by all his relatives. How much more do his friends avoid him? Though he pursues them with pleading, they're nowhere to be found. So that's a person who's needy, needs help, but actually is not wanted at that point. Proverbs 20 verse 6 says, many a man claims to have unfailing love, but a faithful man who can find. Friends are the people we need to be there really when the chips are down, and we can lean on them. Proverbs 17 verse 7 says, a friend loves at all times. And so we can ask ourselves, as we're thinking about friendship this evening, do we have friends who are faithful to us when we are empty, who cherish us for what we are and who we are? And are we the kind of friends who are faithful to others when they're empty and who will cherish them in the low times? So friendship with God and friendship with each other And I want just to spend a few moments now thinking about friendship in the church. Someone said people are not looking for a friendly church, but for a church where they can make friends. And we've had in our passage we've been reading in John 15, where Jesus calls us to intimate friendship with Jesus, which is the key to fruitfulness and to building a strong community whose marks are truth and reality. And I think that is what people are looking for in this world, which is so confusing. They're very keen to find authenticity. Bonhoeffer, in Living Together, said, "The person who loves their dream of community will destroy community, but the person who loves those around them will build community." In other words, if we're always thinking, well, I want it to be like this and it ought to be like that, we become very difficult people. The best model, of course, of a friend is Jesus, who had 3 very close friends, 12 also close, the disciples, then 72, the disciples who were sent out 2 by 2. And then you can't help feeling that even in events like the feeding of the 5,000, he was a person, because he was different from everyone else, who gave off a kind of sense of friendship, even in these big numbers. One of the things that's really important in church, I think, is appropriate disclosure. I think sometimes as Christians, we can feel that because we are all Christians, we must all think the same. Well, it's manifestly obvious in St. Aldates that there's a massive range of opinion about absolutely everything that you could think of, certainly about every big issue that our culture is thinking about at this time: politics, the question of Israel, every ethical matter that we might be thinking about. And it's very important that we respect other people's opinions and allow them to carry them freely. And we need to disclose appropriately, and we need to ask appropriate questions. Proverbs 18:24 says, "A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." So in a big church context, we can't all be friends to the same degree with everybody. We need to allow friendships to develop. I'll be talking about time in the second half. They take time, and not rush things, not jump in too fast. I can remember how desperate I was to find a friend when I arrived at St. Aldates, and I was lonely. My children had all left, really. One was left, but I was very disorientated after the 10 years in Paris. I didn't know any. The only person we knew as we arrived was Simon, who was wonderfully welcoming to us. But I desperately was looking for female friends. And I jumped into a friendship far, far too quickly. And it all went wrong, really, because I over-disclosed, and it was a friendship that wasn't destined to last. And it was an unhappy experience, really. When we ask questions, we also sometimes in church, I think, feel that we're allowed to ask all kinds of inappropriate questions because we're Christians, but this isn't the case at all. I often get on my soapbox and say, do not ask these questions. When are you going to get married? When are you going to have a baby? Or when are you going to have another baby? We never know what kind of pain people are carrying about such things. These are big life issues, and many people have a lot of pain. One of my own nieces has not been able to have a second child, and I think it's a very painful thing for her. And I remember very well in France when we had a whole raft of people having their first babies, and then a couple of years later, all the same couples became pregnant again to have another baby. And there was one couple who were not having another baby, and lots of people kept on asking them in a kind of light-hearted way almost, when are you going to have another baby? But of course, it just created enormous pain for them. And I think we need to be very circumspect about the sorts of things we allow ourselves to ask in the church with people who are friends. But perhaps we haven't got to that stage where we can be so intimate with them. So friendship with God, friendship with others, with each other, and friendship in the church. And just another thing about friendship, I'd like to think about the fact that friendship protects us from loneliness. I believe that friendship is bigger and more far-reaching than marriage even. And Jesus supremely demonstrates that marriage is not the only solution to aloneness. And the truth is that marriage is temporal while friendship is eternal. Of course, in an ideal world, if we are married, we would be very good friends with our partner, but that isn't always the case. And of course, not everybody is married or has a partner. So we do need to demythologize marriage and to recognize that many marriages are places of great loneliness and pain. And that in our lonely culture, we must recognize, particularly as Christians, that the married and the unmarried need each other in the same way that the young and the old need each other. And whether a person is single or married, their well-being is enhanced by having good friends of both sexes. And I had a really interesting discussion with someone who is a friend of mine in the church the other day who is single. And we were just agreeing that our capacity to survive in lockdown is not really dependent on whether we are married or single. It has much more to do with who we are and how we are. There are lots of articles and statistics out there in the media and the internet analysing social isolation. And one of the most tragic and telling is that over half of all people over 75 live alone. And I think the dissolution of the local community and the technology that permits us to construct a fantasy or an isolated world certainly contribute to the plague of loneliness. And many, many people are wandering in the wasteland of our strongly individualist culture. All the old signposts have been taken down and we can't find our way around anymore. We've moved the boundary stones. So loneliness, I think, is prevalent right across the generations, and it relates much more to the quality than the number of relationships. And also, we have to remember that loneliness isn't just an emotional experience, because research shows that loneliness and social isolation are really harmful to our health. If we lack social connections, it's a comparable risk factor for early death as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and affects us more seriously than well-known risk factors like obesity or physical inactivity. That is quite a thought about the possible effects of loneliness. Henry Nouwen, again, on a visit to the US after he'd moved from there to the L'Arche community in France, wrote this on a trip back. What most strikes me is the full force of the restlessness, the loneliness, and the tension that holds so many people. The conversations I had today were about spiritual survival. So many of my friends feel overwhelmed by the many demands made on them. So that to celebrate life together, to be together in community, to simply enjoy the beauty of creation, the love of people, and the goodness of God, these seem faraway ideals. He found it very busy when he went back to the States. And I think we live in an age of rather pale friendship. I've noticed that Christians often try and justify in a way their use of all the social media platforms. And I'm not saying there is no use to them. I just think we need to use them prudently. And people say, oh, you know, they don't perform plastic surgery on their profile. They'd never dream of exaggerating anything. And I wonder really if that's true, because I've always found, I live just near, as you know, probably very close to Marks and Spencer's. And everybody I've ever known always denies that they ever shop there. But whenever you go there, not in lockdown, but pre-lockdown, it was always absolutely full of people. I think that true friendship is becoming increasingly rare, and I think there are many reasons for that. Individualism, fear of commitment, whether to a person or to an arrangement, the fact that we live in a culture of instant acquisition. I think another thing is information overload in the global village world. I think another thing that I think about quite frequently is how we've conflated disagreement with rejection. In other words, it used to be so easy to disagree with somebody who felt differently or thought differently or had really different convictions. And it seems now that often a disagreement is tantamount to a rejection of the whole person. I think this is part of a much bigger thing that's happening in our culture, but I think it's very sad, and I think it's very healthy to have good close friends who think very differently from one. I'll talk a bit more about that in the second half. Thomas Jefferson said, "I never considered a difference of opinion in politics, in religion, or in philosophy as cause for withdrawing from a friend." I wish that that could be the same now. Well, we're going to stop now and have our first breakout room session. And then in the second half, we'll have a look at what the sorts of things we need to put into friendships for them to be beneficial and to cause us to flourish. So I will hand you over to Tom now, and I'll see you again in 10 minutes or so.